So Moira, what is meant by the term objective morality?
Well, when we're talking about objective morality in Catholic teaching, we're trying to establish that there are some actions, some morally wrong actions usually, that are always wrong, that really don't depend on the circumstances in which they take place. And this again is quite different from the personal responsibility. Now the concentration is on the action, if you like, and what actually happens during that action. So objective morality would be having us assess some circumstances and saying, it doesn't matter who does this, it doesn't matter when it was done, it's just in itself wrong and should never be done. And when people start to talk about some of these things, even although the phrase objective morality sounds a bit foreign, perhaps, or a bit too abstract, I think they begin to see for themselves. I always invite people to say, well, can you give some examples of what you think might always be wrong? And some of the headings will come back like torture or cruelty, abuse. And although these are very generic words, they still sum up for many of us something that's just actions that should never be done. When people talk about something like adultery, there are very few people who are going to say, oh, that's fine. So even without having reflected, or we think we haven't reflected on some of these things deeply, but we've gained through experience, I think, a knowledge of what some actions do to other people, again, perhaps to ourselves, and we can see that they're not just wrong for me, but they're universally wrong. And when you use that word universal, that's what objective means. You're using a standard that's not subjective. You're not saying, I think it's okay, and I don't care if you don't think it's okay, but this is my choice, so leave me alone. I think it's right, so I'm doing it. So that's purely subjective. But objective really leaves us all behind in a sense and sets up a standard in a way that we can look to measure exactly what it is we're doing and perhaps why it's wrong as well.
Okay, so what we're doing is we're looking at a moral action, and we're able to say, simply looking at that action, not, as you say, taking circumstances into account, situations, persons, nothing. This action is in and of itself wrong.
Right.
And when you mention examples like torture, for instance, or abuse or exploitation and so on, it seems to me that it's quite clear, we should not be doing these things. But I think that there would be a number of people who, on principle, would be saying, well, seriously, can we say that a particular action is in and of itself always wrong? And can we say that it is wrong independent of circumstances? So how do we know that these acts are intrinsically wrong? How do we come to that knowledge?
Right. I think we come to that knowledge through experience. It's one of these situations, again, where actions aren't wrong because the church says they're wrong. It's not the church that's the objective standard. The church, through its centuries of development, etc., and its knowledge of human experience, looks at the actual action and then recognizes that it's inherently wrong. Just as if I invite an audience in a church to say, can you think of some examples like the ones you just suggested, spontaneously they will say torture, rape is another one. I have never in my life met anyone who would say that there are circumstances where rape would be all right, or that rape was justified. You know what I mean. I think people in general know what that means. So that's the meaning behind it. There are actions that are just so such an assault on human dignity that they can never be justified, never.
So this phrase, an assault on human dignity.
Yes.
And you're pointing out that this is just not something that the Catholic Church is
No.
making up.
No.
So there's something inside of us
Right.
that somehow knows
Yes.
this. Are we sort of making our way into natural law here?
But it is natural law in as much, and the church will say the object of morality is based on natural law. And natural law, as we know it, again, is not human law, it's not our civil law as such, though it's based on natural law, because there are these recognitions of what's right and what's wrong, because they are universal experiences. And the church, I think, has always looked at that universality as the standard. And so that recognition that Thomas Aquinas, for example, just says, comes to us as we develop and can think and can experience, and we're observing what's happening to other people. So it's not a Catholic teaching in that sense. Natural law, Catholic Church uses it as a method, if you like, of explaining it the way we're doing just now, really. But it's not a Catholic. It's not a Catholic teaching as such. It's a human teaching first. So natural law and objective standards, although in a sense it may sound as if I'm saying there's an external standard, it's not an external standard, but it does remove our subjective biases, predispositions to think that certain things could be all right or not, in looking again at what's really at stake is how does this action affect human dignity.
And so when it comes to Catholic Church teaching about objective morality, what's the Church's stance on this?
Well, this is where the Church it has developed its idea of something that's intrinsically wrong. If it's intrinsically wrong, it means it should never be done. And so anything that should never be done is weighty, but that is our standard in making distinctions between right and wrong actions in morality, of course, So I think, again, I don't think there are any other denominations that rely on natural law or those natural law categories quite so much as the Catholic Church does. But I think myself, and perhaps I'm going a bit too far here, that if there isn't an objective morality, it clearly leaves the path open for a kind of totally subjective morality, which has its own inherent dangers.
Thank you very much.